Last time I saw something like you on a stand, it was being sold at auction.
Sergeant Dwight Hollis said that out loud, in a courtroom, in front of 50 people. And nobody, not the judge, not the lawyers, not a single deputy, told him to stop. Willa Taylor didn't blink. She gripped the edge of the witness stand and said,
"I'm here under subpoena. You will not silence me."
Hollis laughed. A real, deep laugh. He leaned in close and whispered just loud enough for the front row to catch it.
I'm watching, sweetheart. Your ancestors couldn't speak in a courtroom either.
He snapped his fingers.
Me, drag her off, now!
2 officers ripped her from the chair and hauled her out like cargo through the double doors. The woman Dwight Hollis just dragged off that stand? She only needed one phone call. And that call ended every single career in that room. Let me tell you about Willa Taylor before that courtroom ever knew her name. It was a Tuesday morning in late October, the kind of Georgia morning where the air bites just enough to remind you summer's gone. Leaves had turned burnt orange along the 2-lane roads outside Calvary, a small town in southern Georgia, population around 6,000. The kind of place where everybody knows everybody, and everybody knows to keep their mouth shut. Willa was up before the sun. She sat at a tiny desk inside an extended-stay hotel room that smelled like carpet cleaner and stale air conditioning. A paper cup of black coffee sat beside her elbow, still steaming. In front of her, a folder thick enough to be a novel. But this wasn't fiction. These were misconduct complaints, dozens of them, filed against the Fulton County Sheriff's Office over the last 10 years. Excessive force, racial profiling, evidence that mysteriously disappeared, body cameras that always seemed to malfunction at the worst possible moment. Willa ran her highlighter across a name she'd seen too many times. Sergeant Dwight Hollis. 31 complaints. 31. And not a single one had ever led to discipline, not even a written warning. She picked up her phone and called her colleague back in Washington. "How's it looking down there?" he asked. "Worse than the file suggested," Willa said. "This department has been burying complaints for over a decade." "Be careful, Willa. That county doesn't like outsiders poking around." She took a slow sip of her coffee. "I'm not an outsider. I'm their oversight." See, here's what you need to understand about Willa Taylor. She wasn't some random woman who wandered into a courtroom. She grew up in Savannah, daughter of a school teacher and a postal worker, the kind of household where excuses didn't exist and report cards got pinned to the refrigerator. She graduated top of her class at Howard University School of Law, spent 12 years as a federal prosecutor, the kind who made defense attorneys lose sleep. Then the Department of Justice recruited her for something bigger. Her title? Deputy Inspector General, U.S. Department of Justice, Office of the Inspector General. That's the person they send when the DOJ believes an entire police department has gone rotten from the inside. Not one bad cop, the whole tree. Willa had investigated over 40 departments across the country. Her referral to prosecution rate was 100%. Every single case she built went to trial, and every single one ended in a conviction. Today, she was in Calvary to observe a misconduct hearing. A young black man named Darnell had been stopped, searched, and beaten during a routine traffic stop 6 months earlier. The officers responsible, Hollis and his deputy, Craig Saunders. The dashcam footage had been declared corrupted. The body cameras were malfunctioning. Convenient, right? Willa had been subpoenaed by the plaintiff's attorney to testify as an expert witness on federal use of force standards. She wasn't there to make friends. She was there to put facts on the record. Now let me set the scene for you. The Calvary County Courthouse looked like it hadn't been updated since the 60s. Red brick exterior. A Confederate memorial stood on the front lawn, moss creeping up the base like even nature was trying to cover it up. Inside, the hallways echoed. Wood-paneled walls, fluorescent lights that buzzed just loud enough to get under your skin. An American flag hung beside the Georgia state flag behind the judge's bench. The gallery was half full, mostly black residents from the community. A few white attorneys shuffled papers at the front tables. 2 reporters from the local paper sat in the back row with notebooks open. Judge Elaine Brower presided from the bench. 60-something, thin lips, 18 years on that seat. She had a reputation for running a tight courtroom and an even stronger reputation for never ruling against law enforcement. And there, at the respondents' table, sat Sergeant Dwight Hollis. Full uniform, badge polished to a shine. He leaned back in his chair with his arms crossed, like a man who owned the room. His attorney, Neil Dawson, sat beside him, a local defense lawyer who'd been getting deputies out of trouble for 15 years. Willa walked in through the back entrance. Quiet. No announcement. No credentials on display. She took a seat in the gallery, opened her notebook, and started writing. Hollis glanced over at her. He whispered something to Saunders. They both looked at Willa and chuckled. She noticed. She kept writing. Her expression didn't change one bit. The hearing started at 9 sharp. Judge Brower gavelled the room to silence, and the air shifted. You could feel it, that heavy, uncomfortable quiet that settles over a courtroom when everyone knows something ugly is about to get dragged into the light. The plaintiff's attorney, a young guy, couldn't have been older than 35, stood up and called his first witness. A woman from the community, black, mid-50s. She'd filed a complaint against Hollis 3 years ago after he pulled her teenage son out of a car by his neck during a traffic stop. No charges were ever filed against the boy. No disciplinary action was ever taken against Hollis. She described that night with shaking hands. The flashing blue lights in her rearview mirror, the sound of her son screaming, the way Hollis pressed the boy's face into the asphalt while 2 other deputies stood and watched. The gallery was dead silent. A woman in the second row pressed a tissue to her eyes. Then Neil Dawson stood up for cross-examination. He buttoned his jacket like he was about to walk into a dinner party. He smiled at the witness, the kind of smile a wolf gives a rabbit. Ma'am, isn't it true your son had a prior arrest for marijuana possession? He was 16. It was a misdemeanor. It was dismissed. But he had been in trouble before, correct? The plaintiff's attorney objected. Judge Brower overruled it. Dawson kept going. He picked that woman's testimony apart, piece by piece. Not because the facts were wrong, but because he knew how to make a truthful person sound confused. That was his gift. 15 years of practice. He'd done it dozens of times in this exact courtroom, in front of this exact judge. 2 more witnesses followed. A black man who'd been stopped and searched walking home from a night shift at a warehouse. A young woman whose car had been impounded after a random inspection that found nothing. Same pattern every time. Hollis or Saunders. No body camera footage. No consequences. And every time, Dawson stood up with that same polished smile and chipped away at their stories. A small inconsistency here, a leading question there. Judge Brower sustained nearly every one of his objections. Then the plaintiff's attorney called his final witness. The plaintiff calls Willa Taylor to the stand. The courtroom rustled. Hollis frowned. He leaned over to Dawson. Who the hell is that? Dawson shrugged. Nobody on my list. Willa stood up from the gallery. She walked to the front of the courtroom with the kind of calm that only comes from having done something 100 times before. No hurry, no hesitation. Her heels clicked on the wooden floor, steady, even, like a metronome. She took the witness stand. The bailiff held out a Bible. She placed her left hand on it, raised her right, and swore to tell the truth. Her voice was clear enough to reach the back wall. The plaintiff's attorney began. Ms. Taylor, can you describe your area of professional expertise? I specialize in federal law enforcement standards, Willa said. Specifically, use of force protocols, search and seizure compliance, and the obligations of departments receiving federal funding. And in your expert opinion, does the conduct described today fall within acceptable federal guidelines? Willa didn't hesitate. No, not even close. She broke it down, piece by piece. The federal threshold for a legal traffic stop. The specific conditions required before an officer can initiate a search. The mandatory protocols around body camera activation, and the consequences when departments fail to comply. She cited case numbers. She referenced DOJ policy memoranda by date. She quoted compliance rates from departments across the country and compared them to what she'd found in the Fulton County files. It was surgical. Every sentence landed like a hammer on a nail. The gallery leaned forward. The reporters in the back row were writing so fast their pens could barely keep up. Hollis stopped leaning back in his chair. His jaw went tight. His fingers gripped the edge of the table. He turned to Dawson and whispered something sharp. Dawson's smile was gone now. Then Willa said the thing that set it all off. In my review of this department's internal records, I identified 31 formal complaints filed against Sergeant Hollis over a 15-year period. Every single one was dismissed without investigation. That pattern does not suggest isolated incidents. It suggests institutional protection of a repeat offender. Dawson jumped to his feet like someone had put a match under his chair. Objection, Your Honor. This witness has no standing in this courtroom. She hasn't been qualified as an expert by this court. I move to have her removed from the stand immediately. Judge Brower looked down at Willa. There was no warmth in her face, no curiosity, just irritation. Ma'am, can you provide credentials recognized by this court? Willa nodded. Your Honor, if you'll allow me 30 seconds, I can... She never finished that sentence. Hollis stood up. His chair scraped against the floor loud enough to make the front row flinch. He pointed at Willa the way you'd point at a stray dog that wandered into your yard. Your Honor, I don't know who this woman thinks she is, but she doesn't belong up there. She's not a lawyer in this county. She's nobody. We've wasted enough time on this circus. Judge Brower didn't reprimand him. She didn't tell him to sit down. She didn't remind him that witnesses are protected under the rules of the court. Instead, she turned back to Willa. Ma'am, if you cannot provide credentials recognized by this jurisdiction, I'm going to ask you to step down. Your Honor, Hollis cut her off. We don't have time for this. Deputies! He snapped his fingers, like calling a dog. Deputy Craig Saunders rose from his seat near the wall. Another officer followed. They walked toward the witness stand with the kind of stride that said this wasn't their first time removing someone who didn't look like them from a room. Willa stayed seated. She looked directly at Saunders and said, in a voice that didn't waver one bit, I am a federal official. I advise you not to touch me. Saunders didn't even slow down. They grabbed her arms, one on each side, and pulled her out of the witness chair. Not gently, not professionally. They yanked her to her feet and marched her down the center aisle of the courtroom like she was being thrown out of a bar at closing time. Gasps from the gallery. A woman covered her mouth. Two men stood up from their seats. A young black attorney in the back row, Terrence Wallace, pulled out his phone and started recording. His hands were shaking, but he didn't stop. Willa didn't resist. She didn't shout. She walked between those two officers with her back straight and her chin level, the same way she'd walked in. The only sound was her heels on that wooden floor. Click, 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 and the creak of the double doors as they swung open and shut behind her. The courtroom sat in silence. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Hollis straightened his uniform, sat back down, and leaned over to Dawson. About time. Dawson nodded. He was already writing something on his notepad. Business as usual. In the hallway, the fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The air was cooler out here. Willa's footsteps echoed against the tile floor. Saunders still had his hand on her arm. He walked her past the water fountain, past the restrooms, toward the exit. Then he pushed her toward the wall, not hard enough to leave a bruise, just hard enough to send a message. "You should have stayed home," Saunders said. He was close enough that she could see the tobacco stain on his bottom teeth. "You people always think you can come in here and tell us how to do our jobs." Willa's voice was flat. No fear, no anger, just facts. "I need you to state your name and badge number." Saunders laughed, a short, ugly sound. "You need to learn your place." He let go of her arm and walked back toward the courtroom. The other officer followed. The double doors closed with a heavy thud. Willa stood alone in that hallway. She smoothed her blazer. She rolled her shoulders once, like she was shaking off the weight of their hands. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. Back inside the courtroom, Hollis was already celebrating. Not with champagne, with posture. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, one ankle resting on the opposite knee. The body language of a man who believed he had just won. Judge Brower picked up her gavel like nothing had happened. She looked at the plaintiff's attorney and said, "Counselor, your expert witness has been removed. Do you have any further testimony to present?" The attorney stood up. His face was flushed. His hands were balled into fists at his sides. "Your Honor, that witness was subpoenaed. She was physically assaulted and removed without legal cause. I move for an immediate..." "She was removed for failure to present adequate credentials recognized by this court," Brower said. Her voice was flat, final. "Motion denied. Move on." The hearing continued, but everyone in that gallery knew it was over. Without Willa's expert testimony, the case had no spine. Dawson knew it too. He sat back in his chair and crossed his legs. He didn't even bother taking notes anymore. The fix was in. Same as always. Meanwhile, out in that hallway, Willa Taylor was making moves. She dialed her office in Washington first. No answer. She left a voicemail. Calm, specific, professional. Case number, location, names, timestamps. Every detail a prosecutor would need, delivered like she was reading a grocery list. Then she made a second call. This one went to the FBI's regional field office. She punched in her badge number, followed by her OIG authorization code. The line clicked twice. A voice answered. "Federal Bureau of Investigation, Southeast Regional. How can I direct your call?" "This is Deputy Inspector General Willa Taylor, DOJ, Office of the Inspector General. Authorization code 7429. I need an emergency dispatch to the Calvary County Courthouse. I have been physically removed from a federal proceeding and detained by local law enforcement officers, who are currently subjects of an active federal investigation." The line went quiet for 2 seconds. Then, "Hold please, ma'am. I'm escalating now." While she waited, she heard footsteps behind her, heavy boots on tile. Deputy Craig Saunders was back. He stood at the end of the hallway with his thumbs hooked into his belt, legs apart. The stance of a man who wanted to look bigger than he was. "Ma'am, you need to leave the building." Willa didn't turn around. She kept the phone pressed to her ear. "I'm on a federal call. Step back." Saunders walked closer. His boots squeaked on the tile. "I don't care who you're talking to. This is county property. You need to vacate the premises right now, or I'm placing you under arrest for trespassing." Willa turned to face him. She held the phone slightly away from her ear, just enough, and spoke into it with a voice clear as a bell. "Please note for the record that Deputy Craig Saunders of the Fulton County Sheriff's Office is currently threatening to arrest a Deputy Inspector General of the United States Department of Justice for standing in a public courthouse." The words hit Saunders like cold water. His mouth opened, then closed. His hand drifted toward his radio, then stopped. He heard the words. He understood them individually, but put together in that order, aimed at him. His brain couldn't quite catch up. He took one step back. But he didn't leave. He keyed his radio and called Hollis. 2 minutes later, the courtroom doors swung open, and Sergeant Dwight Hollis walked into the hallway like a man walking onto his own front porch. Chest out, jaw set, eyes locked on Willa. "I don't care if you're the Queen of England," Hollis said. He stopped 4 feet in front of her. "You disrupted my hearing, and now you're loitering in my courthouse. Either walk out that door right now, or you're getting booked." Willa held up her phone. The screen glowed between them. "Sergeant Hollis, you're being recorded, and the person on the other end of this call has already dispatched a team." "Recorded?" Hollis's lip curled. "Give me that phone." He reached for it, fast, like snatching something from a child. Willa pulled back, 1 step, smooth, controlled. Touching a federal officer's communication device during an active federal call is a felony. I suggest you reconsider. Hollis hesitated. His fingers hung in the air between them for 1 second, 2 seconds. Then he grabbed her wrist. Not the phone, her wrist. His grip was tight enough that the tendons in her forearm shifted under the pressure. The phone stayed in her hand, but his message was clear. "I can do whatever I want to you." Saunders moved in behind her. Close, too close. She could feel the heat of his breath on the back of her neck. Then the courtroom doors opened again. Terrence Wallace stepped into the hallway, phone raised, camera rolling. His face was tight with fear, but his hand was steady. "Hey, she told you she's federal. You need to back off, both of you." Hollis didn't even look at him. "Mind your business, counselor, or you're next." Wallace didn't lower the phone. His finger stayed on the record button. Hollis released her wrist, but he wasn't done. He turned to Saunders and said 2 words that sealed his fate. "Cuff her." Saunders pulled his handcuffs from his belt. The metal clinked in the quiet hallway. He grabbed Willa's left wrist, then her right. The cuffs clicked shut. Cold steel against warm skin. "Charge. Obstruction and trespassing," Hollis said. He straightened his collar like he was finishing a routine traffic stop. Willa looked at him, calm, still holding the phone in her cuffed hands. "You are making the worst decision of your career, Sergeant." "My career's doing just fine, sweetheart." They walked her out the front entrance of the courthouse, down the steps, past the Confederate Memorial, across the parking lot. The Georgia sun was high now. The air smelled like dry leaves and asphalt. Terrence Wallace followed them out, still recording. His phone captured everything. Willa in handcuffs, the 2 officers flanking her, the patrol car waiting with its back door open. Other people from the gallery had come outside now. A small crowd formed on the courthouse steps. Phones came out. Murmurs spread through the group like a current. Saunders opened the back door of the patrol car. He put his hand on the top of Willa's head, that move cops do, pushing someone down into the seat, and guided her in. The door slammed shut. Through the window of that patrol car, Willa Taylor was still on the phone. She hadn't hung up. Not once through the entire confrontation. The line had been open the whole time. She pressed the phone closer to her ear and said one final sentence. Quiet. Almost a whisper. But the words carried the weight of everything that was about to come. "Constance, you have everything you need." Now, here's what nobody in that parking lot knew yet. That phone call wasn't to some random office. It was routed through the emergency line of Attorney General Constance Moore, the highest-ranking law enforcement official in the United States. And from the moment that call connected, every single word had been recorded on a federal server. But that wasn't all. Terrence Wallace's phone video had captured the entire hallway confrontation and the cuffing from 3 feet away. High definition, crystal clear audio. And one more thing. That small pin on the left lapel of Willa's navy blazer, the one that looked like a simple silver square, wasn't decorative. It was a body camera, issued to OIG field investigators for exactly this kind of situation. And it had been recording since the moment Willa walked into that courthouse that morning. 3 recordings, 3 angles, 3 pieces of evidence that were about to rip the roof off the Fulton County Sheriff's Office. 45 minutes. That's how long Willa Taylor sat in the back of that patrol car, hands cuffed, window up. The Georgia sun turning the inside of that cruiser into an oven. She didn't bang on the glass. She didn't yell for help. She sat with her back straight, her eyes forward, and her breathing slow. Like a woman who had already done the math and knew exactly how the equation was going to end. Outside, the small crowd on the courthouse steps had grown. Word travels fast in a town of 6,000. People were whispering. Phones were out. Terrence Wallace was on the sidewalk, talking to 2 of the local reporters. He showed them his video. One of them made a phone call immediately. Inside the courthouse, the hearing was wrapping up. Without Willa's testimony, the plaintiff's case had been gutted. Dawson gave a closing statement so relaxed he might as well have been ordering lunch. Judge Brower looked ready to rule in Hollis's favor by the end of the afternoon. Then someone in the gallery looked out the window and said, "What the hell is that?" 3 black SUVs, tinted windows, federal plates. They rolled into the courthouse parking lot in a single line, slow, deliberate, like a funeral procession. They pulled up right next to the patrol car where Willa was sitting. The engines cut. 6 doors opened at the same time. FBI agents stepped out. 6 of them. Dark suits. Federal badges clipped to their belts. The one in front was a tall man with silver hair and a jaw that looked like it had been carved from granite. Deputy Director Russell Adams, 28 years with the Bureau. The crowd on the steps went dead silent. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." Adams walked straight to the patrol car. He didn't look at the crowd. He didn't look at the deputies standing near the courthouse entrance who had frozen mid-conversation. He looked only at Willa. He opened the back door. He reached in and removed the handcuffs himself, one wrist, then the other. He set the cuffs on the roof of the cruiser like he was putting down a piece of trash. "Deputy Inspector General Taylor," Adams said. His voice carried across the parking lot, every word chosen with precision. "On behalf of the Bureau, I apologize for the delay." Willa stepped out of that patrol car. She stood in the sunlight and rolled her wrists once. The same wrists Hollis had grabbed, the same wrists Saunders had cuffed. She smoothed her blazer. That same blazer, that same gesture. But this time the meaning was different. This time she wasn't shaking anything off. She was putting herself back together, and everyone watching knew it. Adams and his team walked toward the courthouse. Willa walked with them. Not behind them. Beside them. 6 FBI agents flanking a woman who, an hour ago, had been dragged out of this building like she was nobody. They pushed through the double doors, down the hallway, past the water fountain where Saunders had shoved her into the wall, past the spot where Hollis had grabbed her wrist. Their footsteps echoed, a dozen shoes on tile, moving in unison. The courtroom doors opened. Every head in the room turned. Adams walked to the center of the floor. His agents fanned out behind him. Willa stood to his left. The gallery erupted in whispers. Hollis's mouth fell open. Dawson's pen stopped moving. Judge Brower gripped the edge of her bench. Adams spoke. His voice filled the room like concrete. This proceeding is now under federal review. Sergeant Dwight Hollis, Deputy Craig Saunders, you are to surrender your service weapons and badges immediately. Then he turned to Dawson. Mr. Dawson, you are advised not to leave this jurisdiction. Your role in prior proceedings involving this department is now part of the federal investigation. Dawson's face went white. That polished confidence, gone. His hand gripped the edge of the table so hard his knuckles turned yellow. Hollis shot to his feet. You can't just walk in here and... Adams cut him off. No raised voice, no drama, just facts. Sergeant, you physically assaulted and falsely detained a Deputy Inspector General of the United States Department of Justice. We have the federal phone recording, the body camera footage, and civilian witness video. Sit down. Hollis sat, like someone had cut the strings holding him up. The room was so quiet you could hear the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Then Willa stepped forward. She stood where the plaintiff's attorney had stood an hour before. She looked out at the gallery, at the same faces that had watched her get dragged out in silence. Then she looked at Hollis. My name is Willa Taylor. I am the Deputy Inspector General for the United States Department of Justice, Office of the Inspector General. I was sent here to observe this hearing as part of an ongoing federal investigation into systemic misconduct within this department. She paused. Let the words settle. What happened today? My removal from the stand, my detainment, the assault, all of it has been documented and will be submitted as evidence in federal court. She looked directly at Hollis, eye to eye, the same eyes that had looked her up and down like she was nothing. You just gave me everything I needed. Dead silence. Not a breath. Not a whisper. The next 60 seconds inside that courtroom moved fast, the kind of fast that changes lives permanently. Adams nodded to two of his agents. They walked toward the respondent's table. One stopped in front of Hollis, the other in front of Saunders. No words, just open palms extended forward. The universal gesture. Hand it over. Hollis stared at the agent's palm like it was a foreign object. His fingers moved to the badge on his chest, the badge he'd worn for 22 years, the badge he'd polished that morning like he polished it every morning. He unclipped it slowly. The pin made a small popping sound as it released from the fabric. He set it in the agent's hand without looking up. His service weapon came next. He unholstered it with the mechanical motion of a man who'd done it 10,000 times. But never like this. Never with someone else's hand waiting to take it. Saunders followed, badge first, then his weapon. His hands were trembling. The metal clinked against the agent's palm. Hollis tried to speak. His voice cracked on the first word. He swallowed and tried again. I didn't know. If she had just said who she was from the start. Adams didn't blink. She did, 3 times. It's on tape. That sentence landed on Hollis like a concrete slab. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. For the first time in 22 years, Sergeant Dwight Hollis had absolutely nothing to say. Adams turned to his agents. Escort them out. 2 agents flanked Hollis. 2 more flanked Saunders. They walked them down the same center aisle, the same aisle where Willa had been dragged an hour earlier, past the same rows of silent faces, through the same double doors. But this time, the gallery wasn't silent. A woman in the 3rd row whispered, "About time." A man near the back said it louder. Then someone else. The whispers became murmurs. The murmurs became a low hum of something that had been pressed down for a very long time, finally pushing its way to the surface. Hollis kept his eyes on the floor as he walked. Saunders stared straight ahead, face drained of every drop of color. Two men who had walked into this building that morning like they owned it, now walking out with nothing. No badge, no gun, no authority. Just the sound of their own boots on that wooden floor and 50 pairs of eyes watching them leave. Up on the bench, Judge Elaine Brower sat motionless. Her gavel rested on its block. Her hands were folded in front of her, but her fingers were laced so tight the joints had gone white. Adams looked up at her. "Your Honor, your conduct in this proceeding, specifically your failure to protect a subpoenaed federal witness, your denial of her right to present credentials, and your complicity in her unlawful removal, will be included in our report to the Department of Justice. You are strongly advised to retain counsel." Brower's face didn't move, but the color left it. Slowly, like someone had pulled a plug and everything was draining out. She said nothing. She reached for her gavel, tapped it once, weakly, and said, "This hearing is adjourned." She stood and disappeared into her chambers. The door clicked shut behind her. By that evening, the State Judicial Conduct Board had been formally notified. Judge Elaine Brower was placed on administrative suspension pending a full investigation. Meanwhile, the county sheriff, Hollis's boss, who hadn't been present during any of it, released a statement that night calling the incident deeply troubling and promising full cooperation with federal investigators. The kind of statement politicians write when they can feel the ground cracking beneath their feet. But here's the thing. What happened in that courtroom wasn't a surprise to the DOJ. Willa's assignment in Calvary was never just about observing one hearing. The federal government had been building a case against this department for months. Willa's treatment, the insults, the dragging, the cuffs, all of it, didn't derail the investigation. It became the investigation. Exhibit A. Gift wrapped by the very people it was meant to take down. And Willa? After the FBI took control of the courthouse, after the badges were collected and the judge retreated and the cameras stopped flashing, Willa sat alone in a small conference room at the FBI's local field office. She rubbed her wrists where the cuffs had pressed into her skin. Red marks, not deep, but there. She took one slow breath. Then she opened her folder, the same thick folder from that hotel room that morning, and kept working. No celebration, no tears, no victory speech. She had a job to do, and she wasn't finished. The video hit the internet before the sun went down. Terrence Wallace uploaded his phone footage to social media at 4:30 that afternoon. No fancy editing, no caption longer than one sentence, just the raw clip. Willa being dragged from the stand, Saunders shoving her in the hallway, Hollis grabbing her wrist, the cuffs clicking shut, and 6 words underneath. They didn't know who she was. By midnight, it had 2 million views. By the next morning, 10 million. By the end of the week, every major news outlet in America had run the story. Cable news played the footage on a loop. The headline on every channel was some version of the same thing. Federal official dragged from courtroom by officers she was investigating. Pundits debated it. Legal analysts broke it down frame by frame. Civil rights leaders held press conferences on the courthouse steps in Calvary, standing right next to that Confederate memorial, demanding accountability. The DOJ issued a formal statement confirming the investigation and naming every officer involved. No vague language, no alleged. Full names, full titles. The kind of statement that tells you the government isn't asking questions anymore. It already has the answers. Protests spread across the county within days. Hundreds of people marched through downtown Calvary carrying signs that read, "We are Willa," and 31 complaints, 0 consequences. The town that had been silent for a decade suddenly couldn't stop talking. Then the FBI moved in. Not just a few agents, A full investigative unit descended on the Fulton County Sheriff's Office like a storm. They seized everything: personnel records, internal affairs files, body camera archives, email correspondence, radio logs, financial documents. Filing cabinets were emptied, hard drives were cloned. Evidence boxes were loaded into unmarked vans and driven to the regional field office in Atlanta. What they found was worse than anyone expected. Over 120 misconduct complaints filed in the last decade. 85% of them came from Black residents. Excessive force, illegal searches, racial slurs documented in witness statements, evidence that had been altered, lost, or conveniently destroyed before it could reach a courtroom. And almost none of it had ever resulted in discipline. Not a suspension, not a demotion, not even a formal reprimand. The internal affairs process was a rubber stamp. Complaints went in, dismissals came out, every single time. Hollis alone had 31 complaints on file. 31, spanning 15 years. The earliest one came from a Black pastor who said Hollis had pulled him over, called him a racial slur, and searched his car without consent. Then wrote in the report that the pastor had been non-compliant and aggressive. The pastor was 63 years old and walked with a cane. Then the forensic analysts cracked open the dashcam archive. Remember the footage from Darnell's traffic stop? The one that had been declared corrupted? The FBI's digital forensics team recovered it in less than 48 hours. It wasn't corrupted. It had been deliberately deleted. And what it showed was exactly what Darnell had described: Hollis yanking him out of the car, Saunders pinning him to the ground, and both officers striking him repeatedly while he screamed that he couldn't breathe. But the recovered footage didn't stop there. The forensic team found a pattern of deletions going back years. Dozens of dashcam and body camera files, erased, overwritten, or moved to offline storage that wasn't included in discovery responses. Someone had been cleaning house. And the digital trail pointed straight back to Neil Dawson's office. Dawson had been sending emails to the department's IT coordinator with specific instructions: which files to move, which logs to overwrite, which maintenance records to alter so the deletions looked like technical failures. 15 years of evidence tampering, documented in his own words, in his own inbox. The federal grand jury convened in Atlanta 4 weeks after the courthouse incident. The indictments came down fast and heavy. Sergeant Dwight Hollis, assault on a federal officer, false imprisonment, obstruction of justice, and civil rights violations under 18 U.S.C. Section 242. Deputy Craig Saunders, identical charges. Attorney Neil Dawson, obstruction of justice, conspiracy to deprive civil rights, and evidence tampering across multiple cases spanning over a decade. All three were arrested on the same morning. FBI agents arrived at Hollis's house at 6 a.m. He answered the door in a bathrobe. Saunders was picked up at a gas station on his way to work. Dawson was arrested at his law office. Agents walked in through the front door while his receptionist watched with her hand over her mouth. News crews were there for all three. Cameras caught every second. Hollis shielding his face with his hand, Saunders staring at the ground, Dawson in handcuffs, being led past the brass nameplate on his office door that still read, "Dawson Law, serving justice since 2008. The trial was held in Atlanta, federal court, moved out of the county for obvious reasons. The prosecution's case was built on 3 pillars: Willa's body camera footage, the federal phone recording, and Terrence Wallace's civilian video. On top of that, over 20 former complainants testified about their experiences with Hollis and the department. The recovered dashcam footage from Darnell's case was played for the jury. The courtroom was so silent during that playback that you could hear the air conditioning cycling through the vents. Hollis's defense team argued he didn't know Willa was a federal official. The prosecution's response was 4 words: "She told you 3 times." Then they played the body camera audio and let the jury hear it for themselves. Dawson's attorney argued he was simply representing his clients zealously. The prosecution pulled up his emails one by one. "You weren't representing clients, Mr. Dawson. You were running a cover-up operation disguised as a law practice." The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Guilty. All counts, all defendants. Sentencing came 3 weeks later. Hollis, 15 years federal prison, no possibility of parole. Saunders, 10 years. Dawson, 8 years plus permanent disbarment. Judge Brower's reckoning came separately. A state judicial inquiry found a documented pattern of bias. Years of rulings that consistently favored law enforcement, suppressed evidence in misconduct cases, and failed to protect witnesses. She was removed from the bench and disbarred. 18 years of sitting above everyone in that courtroom ended by a single morning when she chose the wrong side. The DOJ followed up with a consent decree, a legally binding agreement that put the entire Fulton County Sheriff's Office under federal control. Mandatory body cameras with tamper-proof cloud storage, an independent civilian review board with subpoena power, mandatory bias training for every officer, community engagement programs supervised by federal monitors, minimum oversight period, 5 years, no exceptions, no shortcuts. The old way of doing things in Calvary was over, permanently. So where is everyone now? Dwight Hollis sits in a federal prison cell in central Georgia. No badge, no uniform, no one to boss around. He filed 3 appeals, every single one denied. The appellate judge wrote one line. The defendant was given every opportunity to stop. He chose not to. 15 years, no parole. He'll be pushing 70 before he sees daylight again. Craig Saunders tried a plea deal. The judge watched the body camera footage one more time and said the plea didn't change what his eyes could see. 10 years. His wife filed for divorce 3 months after the conviction. Neil Dawson lost everything: his license, his practice, his name. 8 years in federal prison for the man who once bragged he'd never lost a case that mattered. The case that mattered most was the one where he sat at the defendant's table. Judge Elaine Brower never returned to the bench. Removed. Disbarred. She sold her house and left the state without a word. The kind of silence she should have chosen that morning, instead of the silence she gave when Willa was being dragged out of her courtroom. Terrence Wallace became one of Georgia's most prominent civil rights attorneys. "I almost didn't hit record," he told a journalist 2 years later. "I almost just stood there like everyone else." Darnell's case was reopened. The footage Dawson tried to erase put the truth back on the record. The county settled and issued its first public apology in department history. The department itself, unrecognizable. New leadership, new policies. Complaints dropped 80% in 3 years. Federal monitors described the community relationship as cautiously hopeful. Not perfect, but breathing. And Willa Taylor? She went back to work. No interviews, no book deals. When a national outlet asked about the Calvary case, she said 5 words. "The case speaks for itself." She's still at the DOJ, still investigating, still walking into courtrooms with a folder under her arm and a pin on her lapel. So here's my question. Sit with it before you answer. If you were in that gallery, if you watched a woman get dragged off the stand for no reason other than what she looked like, would you have stood up? Or would you have stayed in your seat like everyone else? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every one. If this story made you feel something, like, share, and subscribe. More stories like this are coming. Because justice doesn't always show up on time. Sometimes it doesn't show up at all. But when good people stay calm, stay prepared, and refuse to be erased. Sometimes the system works exactly the way it's supposed to. And that's worth fighting for.
And just like that, it was over. The badges, the roles, 15 years of getting away with it, gone. All because the woman they call the bodies made one phone call. Here's what stayed with me. Hollis didn't fall because Wheeler Taylor shouted louder. He fell because she was prepared when nobody thought she needed to be. 31 complaints, 15 years, a whole town that learns to look down at the floor, and then one woman walking with a folder, a silver pin, and the patience to let them dig their own grave. That's the truth nobody wants to admit. Power doesn't fear noise. Power fears the quiet person in the room who refuses to disappear. So let me ask you something. How many Hollises are still sitting comfortably right now because the room stays silent? How many Wheelers have no recording, no phone call, no FBI waiting outside? And the hardest question of all, if you would be in that gallery that morning, which one would you have been? Drop your answer in the comments. I read everyone. If this story hits something in you, like, share, and subscribe, because justice doesn't always show up on time, but when it does, it got King wearing a navy blazer and in a silver pin, and remind everyone exactly who's in charge.